Okay, thank you all for joining us for the last panel. This is the 8th and the last panel of a 2-day conference on Druze studies, held both here at the University of Kansas and virtually via Zoom. Over the past 2 days, we have had a pleasure to hosting here and hearing from nearly 30 scholars with engaging presentations and thought-provoking discussions. Our audience today includes participants from the 2025 Druze Studies Conference, as well as some KU graduate students, most of them are joining online, and early career scholars, and some faculty members who are here because they think that this topic is very significant. I will try to explain why we are holding this panel as part of the Druze Studies Conference. So the vision here is that at each event that we hold, the Druze Studies Journal Editorial Board and the academic committee of the conference aim to dedicate a session to a pressing issue in advancing the field, specifically Druze studies, but also relevant to scholarship more broadly. In 2023, we focused on the challenges that multilingual scholars face when publishing an English language peer-reviewed journal. This year, we wanted to address another key challenge. And after some conversations with graduate students, one recurring theme had emerged: the difficulty of staying organized and completing a research project, especially the final steps of finishing a thesis, a paper, or other scholarly works. These challenges resonate across disciplines and career stages, so it's not just for Druze studies. That is how this session came to be. I am grateful that my dear friend and my dear colleague, Dr. Brian Lagotte, who generously agreed to lead this workshop and focus on a particularly relevant challenge. Dr. Lagotte is an anthropologist specializing in education, and he is an associate teaching professor in global and international studies here at KU. He has spent the past 2 decades advising undergraduate, graduate, and faculty scholars on research and analytical writing. He currently teaches a year-long research capstone that guides students through the process of developing and completing their undergraduate thesis projects. Today, Dr. Lagotte will lead our graduate student and early career scholar workshop on the research Throughline. Dr. Lagotte, the floor is yours, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me for the presentation today. This is the first time I've ever done a semi-in-person and a full Zoom presentation, so excuse me if I'm looking around the room strangely for the camera or other locations. Some caveats before I begin here, talking about graduate students and early career workshops, the research Throughline. First is that from Professor Zeedan, I got a very specific ask for today's work. And that is, as the editor of the Druze Journal, he was telling me that he was seeing a couple patterns in the submissions from early career scholars and graduate students to the journal that they were wrestling with. One of the issues that they were seeing is a pattern of submissions where the writing itself was a little bit weaker than you would expect for a peer-reviewed journal submission. And then the other one, which will have a little bit more influence on my remarks today, is that they were getting submissions that did not fit the actual shape of a research manuscript from start to finish. It didn't have what I'll call today the research through line. So knowing that that's sort of the ask that was presented to me for today's particular remarks, that should focus what comes next so you can understand the logic of what you're hearing. The second thing is when I say with the target audience as graduate students and early career scholars, I would say by early career scholars, I would mean the first 3 years of being a faculty member before your 3rd year review, because that's the time that you are sort of transferring your identity and your practices, your habitus from graduate student to faculty member. And that's not normally as easy as you would think making that transition. So that audience is also very particular to today's presentations. And finally, As Professor Zeedan mentioned, I am at heart an anthropologist of education. And so when somebody says, I've noticed some patterns of human behavior, can you come talk about them? I will probably be talking most of the day today as an anthropologist of education rather than an editor, because we can explain a lot of things that we're seeing in the written documents that are submitted to the journal, some remnants of what happens to us as undergraduate, graduate students carrying through for those first 3 years. Okay, so those are my caveats, beginning to discuss the problem of the submissions that the journal is receiving as an anthropologist of education. And so first thing we need to point out, which is too big for today, but is one of the crucial things to know, especially as you're transferring from a graduate student to a faculty scholar, is that schooling as an institution, and I'm speaking normally from the United States context, of course, but I have done as an anthropologist international research on schooling. Schooling does an amazing job at producing incredible undergraduate students and graduate students, but it doesn't always do a great job as producing incredible scholars. And what I mean by that is we get certain habits as undergraduate and graduate students that we get 4.0 average, we get plaudits from our faculty, we get credits, we get degrees, and we get out. But that doesn't necessarily replicate what a scholar does in their research practices. We know tricks as undergraduate and graduate students of how to read enough to go to class and participate, so it seems like we've read all of it. We know how to write a paper at a deadline in a way that we can get an A, but again, it doesn't really replicate what we're doing. And so I'm going to talk about how that affects us as our transition of producing documents then, and how we can offset some of these habits, which I would argue almost run counter to some of the things that we would want to develop as scholars. And again, today is more of a workshop than a lecture, so I'm only going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then I would love to take questions, examples, inquiries for the second 30 minutes to make it rather a discussion rather than a lecture. No, we're doing technical work, don't worry. Okay, perfect.
When you want.
Okay, next one, please. Okay, so one of the things that we do not get as undergraduate and graduate students very often is direct instruction on structural revisions and mechanical edits in our work as students. We're expecting that freshman, sophomore English did that. We're expecting AP English in high school did that. And so we never really get the tips to manage the fine-tuned details of our writing before submission. And so this kind of is exasperated. Go ahead, Rami. By this kind of chart. This is actually what the general time balance is for a scholar doing a writing project. And so you can see that there's a lot of time spent before you even go to the computer doing your research, organizing your thoughts, and forming an outline of some way so that when you're sitting at the computer, you know what the paper is already about. You're not figuring it out at the computer. Now, the outline can look like a traditional outline. I usually have all of my students do paragraph skeletons in order, so it doesn't look like a traditional outline, but you know what you're going to do when you sit at the computer. Then sitting at the computer goes quite quickly because you know what you're going to write, and you know that when I'm done writing it, it's going to be terrible. That's the whole definition of the first draft, is to be the worst possible draft, because I know as a scholar, not a student, that majority of the work happens after the first draft is done. Whether I'm showing it to my advisor, I'm showing it to my peers, I'm drafting, I'm sending out to blind reviewers, all of that work towards the ending of our publications. But now I know nobody watching this particular nobody sitting in this room or watching has ever done this, but this is often what the schooling process instills upon us. You can't imagine that you have your seminar paper for your graduate seminar. You don't have that done the first draft at halfway through the semester. That is extremely rare. You're waiting to do all of the readings to write your graduate seminar paper, usually the last 3 weeks, last 2 weeks of the seminar. That's just kind of how the rhythm of the semester builds, but that's not how we would write. So you go figure out what you want to do for your assignment. You go to the library, you grab some sources, you sit right down at the computer and toil away for hours trying to figure out what you're saying. And then your paper, you're tricking yourself into thinking that you can write, revise, and edit simultaneously at the computer. And then when you're done the night before, you skim it for some typos and you turn it in. Okay, and so this is the habit we get into, that if we don't break and realize, okay, that makes a good graduate student, but not a great scholar, that's one of the problems it has. And actually, this isn't the problem. The problem is that you get A's in your seminar class for doing that. And that's why I'm saying the structure anthropologically, looking how the structure of schooling is as an institution is as much as the problem as individual agency. Surely if you got C's on this kind of paper, which is probably the condition the paper is in after this process, then you would change your habit. You'd have a more scholarly habit. But we are constantly being reproduced to understand that this could cut it when it doesn't cut it. So if you're doing this kind of process and sending it into a journal, it will probably not make it to the I'll send it out for review process. It will immediately be turned back to you and be explained. You need more revision and editing. So since we do not get direct instruction from in our coursework, then when our advisor, when our faculty, when the peer reviewer says, look, you need to go revise this for better structure, it wanders, and edit it for better mechanics, it's quite sloppy. That sounds like a plan, but what do we actually do when we're given those instructions? And so two things normally happens. One is that there's sometimes one professor in your graduate program that is really, 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 really a hard grader on your writing. And then obviously most of the students avoid taking classes with that professor unless you realize, oh, wait a second, this is the person that's educating me. I should not be avoiding this person. I was lucky enough to have the person right here at KU, go Dr. Donald Stoll, who was just adamant about structure and mechanics in your writing in his classes. Okay, so if you don't have one of those people in your programs, then you have to, in order to get revision and editing techniques, you have to read writers. And so you don't just read writers in the academy. So of course I read Howard Becker writing for social scientists, but I also read Stephen King on writing. And of course I read Strunk and White Elements of Style, but I also read Ray Bradbury's Zen and the Art of Writing, because you're going to not only pick up individual revision and editing techniques, but you're going to start seeing repetitious patterns. It doesn't matter if you're Stephen King or Strunk and White, they will all say write actively, don't use the passive voice. They will all say the first sentence of the paragraph is the most important sentence of the, and so then you'll start seeing, okay, now I can form a checklist of things to do to my writing at the revision and editing stage that will increase the quality. So one of the things we need to break away from leaving graduate school and thinking that we're going to be published in peer review articles that are receiving hundreds and hundreds of submissions to comb through is that the quality of the prose itself needs to be incredible. And this is only more pertinent for an international discipline like Druze studies and an international journal where sometimes the writing is being translated and then manipulated into English where your skills have to be even stronger. Okay. The second thing that happens, and this happens quite a bit, is that as undergraduate and graduate students, we are reading and reporting more than we're discovering and synthesizing. We do a lot of read and regurgitate in our papers. And again, that's not the problem. We haven't been taught differently. The problem is that we continue to get A's in our seminar papers for going to the library, reading a bunch of stuff, and then writing down what we've read. This is the most crucial part that we do this is in usually the literature review portion of our research article. It's very difficult to get the hang of the literature review for the purpose. And so before I show the next slide, I just want to have a disclaimer. Druze study is not that large. And so when I went onto the ProQuest database to find some real world examples to talk about, there were a very few dissertations to choose from. And since many of you online are probably Druze scholars, if I accidentally picked the dissertation that somebody literally in the audience wrote, bear with me, So sorry I picked that one, but let's take a look at a couple of examples of what I mean. This is a paragraph that comes from a dissertation literature review. And we can just look at the structure of the paragraph to see what I'm talking about, reading and reporting. The first sentence of the paragraph, Eric Hobsbawm's notion of invented tradition can help us understand the process by which Druze particularism was created by the Israeli state. Fascinating. I cannot wait to hear how Hobsbawm can explain particularism in the Israeli state. But then we look at every other sentence in the paragraph. Hobsbawm uses the notion in order. He argues that invention. Eric Hobsbawm argues the invented. That is just raw summary of something I read from his article. It does nothing to teach me what the topic sentence is doing. Remember, this is in a dissertation that is defended, and this is Dr. Somebody now. And so this is just where the schooling system kicks in, that fine, you did a good enough job, we're gonna pass you through. We can't read and regurgitate, that's not what it looks like. One more, you're gonna like this coming over here. Okay, here's another one, same lit review. Remember, this is a lit review, and a lit review has a very particular function of our through line that we're gonna talk about in a second, and it is not to summarize books and articles. That is not what the lit review does. But this paragraph tells me nothing about the Druze or the author's project. It is just a paragraph summary about imagined communities and Benedict Anderson. I have no idea why I'm reading this. I have no idea how it fits with the project. The student has done an amazing job of reading Anderson and repeating what they read in the paragraph and called it a literature review. But this is nothing like a literature review paragraph we would ever see make it through the process of a submitted article that would go out for blind review, because it's just not doing the purpose. So we have to break away from what was successful in graduate school and what was successful as a scholar. Let's take a look. So this is a paragraph from a lit review that does a real lit review job of talking about collective violence theory and the Israeli state. You could see from the beginning of the paragraph then it's doing what we're supposed to do when we're synthesizing ideas together. The author is saying, look, here's some past research of what's been going on, and I'm describing the study under question. And then I'm giving examples from multiple sources. And so in this article, this paragraph, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sources just in the very middle of the paragraph that all support the author's discovery. And then the paragraph ends with the purpose of the lit review to place the research within the conversations that are happening in the discipline to prove need for that work in the future. And so this is where you see an author who has read a bunch of things, seen connections between the different things individually, and come up with a synthetic statement of an aha, here's what I discovered, here's the evidence of my discovery, and here's how it connects to the overall through line of the product I'm trying to produce. That is not reading and regurgitating. Now you have to give this particular author, you have to cut them some slack, because this isn't a PhD, this is an undergraduate thesis that comes from the past. So, but it's still pretty good. Okay. And then finally comes really what we are talking about, the last idea I want to share before we go to questions and talking about samples, and that is we do a ton of research assignments as undergraduate and graduate students. We get good at them, but they are rarely research as the process goes to fit a through line. So we write class papers, we write seminar papers. Sometimes we get assignments and they're called research papers, but they're not. They'll go to the library, get information and write down whatever. We write qualification exams. And so you notice that the lit review of a dissertation or thesis, those paragraphs, they look like a comprehensive exam, which basically is an exercise in United States graduate school, PhD programs, that is, go read as much as possible and write down all of the stuff you read for an exam and we'll pass you. And so that's why you're not seeing any synthesis in these dissertations. You're just seeing chunks of summary after summary because we carry those habits with us afterwards. We write proposals, we write chapters of our thesis, and it's not till our dissertation thesis that we even become close to writing a product that fulfills the analysis through line, but by then we're nearly done. We've been in our PhD program for 5 to 7 years. It's the last thing that we're writing, and then we're out the door. And so we have a lot of bad habits built in from the process of schooling, and we've never been taken aside to show exactly what the analysis through line looks like. This is especially true with class seminar papers. It's especially true in a lot of graduate programs in the United States. You'll have a research methods class of your discipline. And in that research methods class, often you write a proposal for the thesis or dissertation. And when you're writing that proposal, it also often contains the lit review and research design. And then you use that lit review and research design semesters later, and you plug it into the front of your thesis when it could or could not look exactly like your research would, and you don't go back and revise it to make it fit, but you turn it in and you pass your defense and you graduate. Somebody has to stop you and be like, wait. Okay, so the second concern that the editors had, besides just the quality of the prose, was that the document does not fit what the research through line is. And so let's take a look at what I mean by through line. So the through line is an unconscious scheme of a narrative product that's socialized into your brain so that you know what to expect when you hear what the product is you're about to be given. So a poem has a through line, a research article has a through line, an opera has a through line. I watch a lot of Top Chef, so I've learned from the chefs that a dinner from appetizer to dessert has a through line. Is in the chef's world, all of these kind of events have a through line. It is a subconscious scheme socialized in our brain so that when we hear the product we're about to get, we know what we'll receive. And that is pretty serious and abstract. People are probably not understanding what in the world I mean. So let me use the silliest possible example so you understand what the through line is in your brain, especially for the students here in the US. I am going to tell you a very, very basic Hollywood general through line. And as you're listening to me, I want you to write down, even you at home on the Zoom, write down or think of all of the titles that pop into my head when I'm hearing this story. Okay, here we go. Here is the introduction of the through line. The introduction of this movie usually involves meeting the star, male star almost all of the time in these movies, and female star of the movie. And in this introduction, they meet in some way, but when they meet, it doesn't seem like they're going to get along. It doesn't seem like they're hitting it off. There's some tension there. They might be met with friends, something's going to happen, but there is some weird circumstance that they're stuck together for the rest of the movie and then they have to make it work, whatever it is. But they don't really like each other then. So then we go to this rising action of the movie, and during the rising action, they're having to go through the difficulties of whatever this particular plot line has. So you have a lot of montages during this part of the movie. Maybe they're in a swan boat in Central Park, or they're planning their best friend's wedding, or whatever. And then as the rising action goes, you start to notice, wait a second, it seems like they are getting along now. And as a matter of fact, it seems like they're getting along so well, they might be falling in love actually unexpectedly. Holy cow. Until we get right about here near the end of the rising action, and then something happens. One of them has a secret that they should have told the other one. Maybe there's a big blow up fight or whatever. And so now we're thinking, oh my goodness, love is lost forever. They're breaking up, and now the movie has no meaning until the climax, which is the big chase scene where one of the couples starts chasing the other one down the street or riding a horse on a beach. I don't know, these are amazingly silly movies, until they finally meet up at the end of the chase, They hug, they realize that they love each other, and then this denouement is 2 years later appears on the bottom of the screen, and they've been together and they're married and in love, and then that's the end of the movie. Anybody? I saw you writing some down. Just tell me one of the ones that you thought of.
Like all of them, or
Yeah, rip them off for us.
The Notebook, Princess and the Frog,
Princess and the Frog, The Notebook,
Harry Met Sally,
When Harry Met Sally,
27 Dresses,
27 Dresses, You Got Mail, any others?
Things I Hate About You.
10 Things I Hate About, okay, that's the point. Thank you for our one participant who knows like every rom-com there could possibly be, okay? And that is the rom-com through line. I did not have to tell you any of the titles. I just gave you the general, it is a subconscious schema socialized in your brain that you understand the moment I say rom-com, you know what the movie's about. Now, you're interested in the way this particular movie is executed. Is it going to be funny and interesting or boring and cliche? That's what peer review's for. Let's send it out now to see if it's a good or bad article. But I know exactly what's going to happen, introduction, body, conclusion. And so as a nerd, when I hear research article, the through line pops into my head just as easy as rom-com. I know what I'm going to get. And if I don't get it, then it seems very weird. And so if you're sending a product into a journal and it's missing or doing some of these pieces incorrectly, you're not going to make it to blind review to figure out if it's interesting or it's boring. You just have, I'm sorry, this doesn't fit the parameters of the journal. We can't even send it out for review. And what that through line is that it's the introduction, sets the scene, gives us a little context. Then we move to the lit review because the rising action. Sometimes, depending on your journal, the introduction and lit review are compressed into one section, but we get the point. There's two different functions. The reason that the lit review begins the tension is, like I said, the lit review is the argument. It is not a descriptive piece of writing where you're describing research. It's an argument that because of the trends of the research surrounding my topic, my project is necessary to move those understandings forward. You need my research. That's why your lit review and research design are the main parts of a grant proposal. You have to argue that my research is needed before you get the money. It's an argument, so I'm building the tension of why you need my research based on particular trends that have come out. Then the research design proves this was the best way to get at this question. The data you chose was excellent. The collection process was systematic. The analysis method was thorough. So now I'm pumped. I'm so ready to read your analysis section, which is the climax. Here's all of my findings. Here's the answer to my question. Here's the argument. And then we come down with the resolution, which is the discussion, which is the synthesis. And then we go out as a conclusion. And so if I don't get that in a research article as an editor, I can't send it out for blind review. Even if some of the parts are there and they're awesome, it just can't go out. So in actuality, having a completely solid through line but weak writing is easier to get to a journal because an editor can help you with mechanics and structure if the through line is amazing. It's actually much harder to have beautiful writing and an imperfect through line and get it to blind review. So now I want to go through a couple of things because this right here, lit review analysis and discussion, is the heart of the analytical through line. Yes, the introduction does set the scene. The research design explains how I'm going to do it, and the conclusion wraps up. They are functionally important. But the heart of your article, the scholars and the peer reviewers are looking for, is the connection between a lit review, analysis, and discussion. And so I'm going to give you some simplistic examples of how these kind of look so that you could see how I tie them all together. And so one of the most common, if there is a debate in your field around your topic, you've found the perfect lit review, because that means surrounding your topic about Druze identity or Israeli state building or whatever circumstances you're talking about, there's one group of scholars who think A is the cause, there's another group of scholars that thinks B is the cause, and those camps are constantly arguing. And so you can write a lit review where you could talk about the researcher's position and then say, I'm going to design a case study then. So my project is necessary because I've designed an experiment or a project or research that can get at this debate. I want to push the discipline further so we can get to the bottom of this, or else we're just going to be arguing forever. There has got to be some sort of resolution. And so then in the discussion after I do my case study, that's when we have the resolution. Okay, I've tested it. Here's my experiment discussion. So let's talk about why my findings show group A is probably more right in this situation. Now, we're dealing with amazingly complex topics. And so the discussion is not normally, therefore, group A is right. It's normally, okay, this is the part that group A gets really well. This is the part that group B gets really well. Let's try to synthesize it. And so the discussions are more sophisticated than these really stark examples, but you get the picture. The debate, my test, here's now what I think the debate is a beautiful analytical through line at the core of the paper that an editor would want to see. Another one is if we don't have, it's the burgeoning field or a new topic, and we don't have enough examples of research in that topic to come to some general exploration, that this is also a form of replication in our research, testing these preliminary exploratory research articles and adding our voice to it. I mean, we would really love to say that in every situation, Drew's identity in this case is X, Y, and Z, but we only have 2 studies that shows that. You can't really say that yet. And so maybe in 2010, this research did it, 2020, this research did it. So I'm going to do the same project in 2025 and see if I come up with the same conclusions. Maybe this research was done in Jordan. This research was done in Israel. I'm going to do this research in Syria and to see how. So you're adding in this case a new case study to this general understanding. So we as scholars could say, you know what? There's been 56 studies that have all come to the same conclusion. Let us now as a field say, this is sort of an academic truth kind of situation. And then that makes for a wonderful lit review too, because you have to cover the different ways the research has been done and explain how your project is going to replicate that in a new way. And finally, you can have more sophisticated through lines that really talk about theory building. And so you might have a project that is talking about how well or poorly researchers have been engaging with and applying theory to their project. And so you're wondering, okay, so if third wave feminism is really exploring this kind of issue well, and here's the premise of how researchers have been explaining this theory. So I'm going to do a case study on women's relations in the political field of such and such country. And then at the end, I can go back to the discussion connected to my lit review and say, okay, yeah, third wave feminism really does explain the disparity we're seeing with representation. And I'm just making stuff up now, Parliament, but we get the picture. Theory, my empirical, back to theory. And so you're wanting to see this sort of connection come back to the first step of your through line, so it forms the overall arc of the project. Because one of the interesting phenomena that was described to me is some of the articles were coming in, they had amazing literature reviews, perfect research designs, and some interesting findings. And then the discussion and conclusion just went completely into left field, talking about nothing that was mentioned in the lit review. So you got to come back and close the loop to the through line so that you're sort of getting the tension out of the tension that you set up in the through line and the lit review and the analysis. Okay, so that's 3 things. Go ahead. We have graduate school habits that we can't bring into faculty scholarship that might be, we're not spending the proper amount of time or given the tools for structural revisions or mechanical edits that we would love apply to our work before we send it out. We are not really being taught or promoted of how to synthesize interesting discoveries amongst materials. And we end up summarizing, which won't really make it through a blind review, even though it would be amazing for a graduate school paper. And finally, we don't often understand that a research article has a particular academic through line that editors are just automatically in their brain assuming that's what they're going to get for a submission. So if we don't have the through line from start to finish, again, the articles will probably not make it through that phase to blind review, and we'll have to start from scratch. And so those are kind of the topics I wanted to bring to bear for the assignment I was given. I'll be happy if Dr. Zeedan can collect some comments or questions over the Zoom at all, or if there's any in the room. Feel free to do so now as he pauses dramatically for a drink to allow anybody to. In the room, yes, sir.
So,
Just a second, maybe we'll let the audience online hear us.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed every single part of the presentation. I get a lot of benefits as a PhD candidate.
Nice.
And my question will be about dissertation. I understand that this time through that you are talking about is supposed to be in every paper, dissertation, thesis, and everywhere, with a lot of revision, with a lot of, this picture that shows sometimes like comic with your proposal looks like a very beautiful horse and it ends with a very ugly drawing. Well, this is usually dissertations, unfortunately, looks like that because you have a good idea and you have some thoughts, and then with a lot of revision, sometimes you have to change the whole idea. And sometimes you have to change what you want to write about to keep yourself as enthusiastic in that field, and you want to write something beautiful that other people will get benefit from, and also have your PhD. How you can be in like how can you get there with this timeline that I
Yeah.
see beautifully in your
Exactly.
presentation?
The structure that you're put in
Yes.
place. Sometimes you're turning in the finish/first draft/early draft to your dissertation committee weeks before you're about to defend and be done. I agree with that. So what I would think about then is the reason that we do graduate student and early career scholars first 3 years is I would think about that whole time being important to you. And knowing, first of all, if I could start as early as possible in the drafting process, even earlier than I'm expected to by the school, I will have more time to have more readers. I have to have a triad of other graduate students. I cannot make it through graduate school alone because I need people to constantly read my work. So if I don't have a triad of other graduate students where the 3 of us are trading, you want a triad because you want 2 people to give you feedback because sometimes they disagree, and that's also super interesting. Then you have time to draft before you even give it to faculty. So that's one tool I would immediately implement. You cannot do it yourself because you can't tell how beautiful the first draft is because writing is a relationship between you and the reader. So it doesn't matter how awesome you think it is. You don't know what you have to do to make it better until you let your reader read it and tell you, here's what was the strong parts, here's the weak parts. And so instead of fearing peer review, instead of fearing critique, you should change in your mind to, could you tell me where the bad parts are? I've gotten as far as I can. So I need a triad. I need to start as early as possible. And I need to come to grips with the fact that my dissertation is probably the first, it sounds so stupid to say because you've been working on it so hard, but mentally, the dissertation defended and deposited is probably the first draft of the documents and chapters that will come after it, because now I have a year or 2 to get a bunch of publications and I can be pulling things from my dissertation. I can look at chapter 2 of my dissertation literature review is probably never going to be a literature review for a publication. It just doesn't look like that because like I said, it's probably just a quals exam that we shoved in because it looks like a lit review. And so we have to be savvy enough to know the writing I'm doing for my dissertation is the kernels of knowing what I should be doing, but it's not exactly what I should be doing next. And so I won't put so much pressure on myself to think that the dissertation is going to be the final kind of step. The dissertation gets my degree, and I'm still working on that material, whether I work on it because it comes a monograph whole and it becomes my first book, or I cannibalize it and I get 3 or 4 articles out of it. I know I still have time to polish it. I know what the through line should look like now. I know what I should be doing. And so even for my students, we have a 2-semester capstone because the fall semester is for them to screw it all up. Like they don't know how to do it at first. I just force them to try it so that in the second semester, they're like, oh, okay, now I see what I'm doing and I do it much better. So sort of use your graduate training as that kind of experience where you're giving it a go, you're fulfilling your schooling requirements, but you've learned so much in that process that when you go to publish from it, it's okay to say it's not that great yet. It will be great now that I can see these things, and take some pressure off yourself and think a longer term than just the last semester or year that I'm dissertating.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I want to invite our audience. Please either post your questions on the Q&A or on the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, we will allow people who are panelists to talk and present their problem, their question, their examples. Even for this panel, we will give the opportunity for people who are only attending. Just raise your hand and we'll open the microphone for you to be able to ask a question. In the meanwhile, we have one question from the audience, and I will ask one of my students here who are helping to read the question.
Yeah, this question comes from Natalie Friend. She asks, what other advice would you give to the graduate students without faculty holding them to this standard who want to improve their work in this way?
Yeah, so I would think that the first thing you have to do, so when you have a triad, because frankly, I'm sure we can say this out loud, we're human beings, we know this is the case. Advisors in institutions have varying levels of dedication to your project compared to their projects. So sometimes you will have an advisor that is just with you every step of the way. Every week you're checking in, they're constantly reading your material. But I would say that is a little bit more of the exception than the rule. So like you're mentioning, how do I self-generate this kind of productivity, this kind of growth when I don't have faculty pushing me in my classes or my advisor paying that much attention? And so I'll just go back to a couple of things that I've said that help my students now and that help me as a graduate student. The first thing to do is get like-minded graduate students. Got to find 2 other students who also want to improve, will hold each other accountable, aren't just giving lip service to wanting to get better. They're in it to win it. They're willing to meet twice a month. And so now you have your triad. Then what you want to do is, as you're exchanging papers, as you're talking about your writing, you need to design your own rubric. I mean, my students have the infamous rubric of rules that you have to apply to revision and editing. But what you want to do is you want to develop as a group, as a triad, your own rubric by together reading the writing books. So not only do you read on your own, but you have your writing circle. One week could be we're looking at your writing, but the next week could be reading Strunk and White. And the next week we're looking at some reading, and we're writing down, here are the things they're saying we think are important. And so now you have a list of 10 or 12 things. The first sentence is most important. Write actively, not passively. Use concrete nouns, not pronouns. And so when I'm reading each other's work then on a weekly basis, I'm checking for those things, and it makes the peer review infinitely more productive, because if you don't have a threshold or your own generated rubric, peer review looks a lot like showing up and I skimmed your work and I say things like, oh, I really loved it. Oh, it's so interesting. You did a great job. Done. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I need you to tell me specific, like we're here to improve each other's writing. So you need a systematic way to grow as a group that you yourself generate by looking at experts in the field and continually going from learning about what other writers say is strong skills and then applying them to your own work. One of the hidden benefits of peer review is at first, you will very easily see the mistakes in your peers' writing that you are also making in your own writing that you don't see because it's your own writing. And so once that vision starts opening up to you because you're working in your triad, Then when you start looking at your own writing, you're like, oh, goodness, now I can see all this passive voice in my own writing that I overlooked. And so peer review has a lot of fringe benefits as far as that goes as well. And so if I'm pushing myself, which you have to do, that's how you get the education out of your educational experience and move away from schooling. Get a like-minded graduate students, form a systematic way to come to your own conclusions about strong and weak writing, apply those conclusions to each other's writing while you're learning together, and over time, just that activity, you will grow in leaps and bounds, and your products will look far different than your peers. And that's the way that people will mention it. And one of the last things I would say about forming your own rubric of things that you think are important to look for is I've heard a lot of times when you meet with your advisor and your work isn't as strong as they want to be, and so they tell you to revise and edit, and you ask them for some tips about how to revise and edit, the first thing they see is find a sample and use that sample that you find of somebody else's thesis or published article and try to use that for your own work. But the question is still out there, how do I know the sample I pick is good? What if I pick just a bad sample because there's so much bad writing out there? So you need your own threshold of what you think is quality by researching what these other writers have said.
Okay, we have a question from Mael Boamar. Please, you can ask your question.
Thank you, Dr. Professor. So we know that the students have to do their work themselves without any help. But now there are many applications from AI which helps the students to do their work in high quality. And we see many universities issue guidance and advise the students to use these applications and show them how to use it. For example, many applications help the students to find the relevant literatures for their research, and many applications help to assist the work and to give some suggestions how to edit to be in the high standard or something like that. So what do you think about this? So nobody can ignore this now. Everybody can use this strategy, this technology. And I don't know how now to understand it under the question of the self-work or the self-study. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a fascinating question that's occurring right now. I would say a couple things about that. If I'm using these AI language learning module systems to be asking questions like, tell me 10 characteristics of strong academic prose, or show me 3 different reasons why a lit review is effective, or these types of skill-based, using it as a research assistant to learn tips and tricks, I would think that those are going to be useful tools to quickly gather that sort of information. I would be hesitant to be using these modules to produce prose that I'm using, even if they are quite easy to use and it sounds as if the writing is coming across as high quality or high standards, for a couple of reasons. One, like I mentioned, we have students that can attest to this, I have a very, very specific and strict writing rubric for my seniors that have 10 things that they have to use for content, revisions, and editing. And I have tried to trick ChatGPT into using that rubric to produce an essay, and it can't do it very well. And so it doesn't really know how to use these sort of grammatical structural revision techniques that you would learn yourself by paying attention to writers or instructional books for your own writing. And the another reason why I would be worried about using it for content is I think native speakers are becoming pretty savvy at reading AI generated material and seeing that it looks a lot like something very sophisticated and high quality. But if I stare at it with really close visions, it's sort of like cotton candy. It's kind of like empty. It's kind of like, I used to call it, there used to be called this thing called ad libs, where there's a paragraph on a page with missing words and you would just put a noun here, verb here, and then you would read it to see how funny the story became, because the story made sense, but it was silly because you're just adding in random words. And so the way that these language models function, they can put the right words in the right places. So on the surface level, it looks quite applicable, but it doesn't really say that much as far as what you're trying to get across. Finally, writing is a two-dimensional form of your thinking. And so if you're not doing the writing to be thinking through your issues and how to express it, then the product that you're showing people, if you're quizzed upon or if you're asked to go in depth about the issues that you raised in your writing, but it was produced by a language model, and then you suddenly can't explain it very well, you do not want to be shown to be a fraud like that. You want to make sure that you could support everything you put on paper. And so for the reason of authenticity, for the reason of depth of content rather than surface level content, and for the reason that it could be a good assistant, but it can't be a good producer, I would be a little bit wary about using AI to be producing text for me rather than being a research assistant for me personally. But we're in the midst of this sort of halcyon days of AI. Who knows what will happen as it develops?
Hello. Firstly, thank you so much for coming in to speak today. I've learned and taken so much of what you said to heart. My question for you is that you've mentioned quite a bit in your speech about bad habits that graduate and undergraduate students form in their writings and when they're researching, things that they're doing that sort of get them by but don't help them to understand what they're learning. What are some bad habits and how does one avoid those in the beginning of their writing and their formulating their scholarship?
That's great.
And maybe when to start avoiding and when to think about the changes that you will showing us with
yeah.
examples and practical things that they should do. Is it something that we need first to learn how to do the basic things, to write an annotation for a piece before we move to actually being able to do the synthesizing thing?
Yeah. I would say there's no time like the present. And so in my freshman classes, although a very, very basic form, very short assignments, just using some newspaper articles, not using sophisticated data, I try to show them how to read several articles and put the information together and tell me something they discovered. So a first semester freshman can come up with this kind of material. And this is, to your question, another frustrating part is I used to only work with graduate students. And then I was thinking when I was teaching master's students things that I couldn't believe I was teaching them. Like, how did you not learn this in high school? That's when I thought, you know what, if you just gave me seniors their undergraduate year, I would make them, because this stuff is not necessary. It's not in organic chem or trig where the material is hard. It just takes time and effort. And so when do we start? We could start as early as the freshman year, first semester, or as soon as somebody comes and tells you the first thing of their speech is schooling is not that great for you all the time. Then that kind of shocks you into waking up. Okay, so what are some very key tiny bad habits that schooling reproduces into us so that we think they're good habits and they're not? We sit down at a blank piece of paper and we don't know what the paper's about yet. We kid ourselves into thinking, I'm going to write the paper from scratch as I'm writing. I don't need to be organized before I sit down. And so the 21st century, for the 20th century version, it meant you had books, articles all over your desk and sticky notes and highlighters. The 21st century expression of this is I walk over and I look at my students' browser and they have like 55 tabs open on their browser. And there's, what are you doing? How can you get organized? So do not ever sit down at a blank piece of paper without knowing what you're about to write, start to finish. Writing is difficult. Revision is even more difficult. Synthesizing your ideas is difficult. If you try to do all three of those things simultaneously, it's exponentially more difficult. So separate, don't sit down without knowing what you're doing. The first draft is not for public consumption. Okay, I mean, I would definitely not show it to my faculty members, nevertheless my friend to tell me how bad it is. And so when we get to the habit of sending in these first drafts that I just skimmed for typos into our faculty for a grade, oh boy, yes, I'm getting A's, but that's because the faculty's just kind of skimming over it and writing A minus B plus at the top and turning it back. They're not paying that much attention to it. Now, if you don't write like that, if you spend time to turn in the third or fourth draft because you have a series of techniques that you want to apply to it to make it better, then faculty will wonder who wrote this paper. Wow, this paper looks different than all of the rest. And so they're not going to say anything to you in class because they're too busy grading, but they're not really going to invite you to their research project. They're not going to notice your name for letters of recommendation until you're doing something different than everybody else, which is to stop turning in early drafts, which means you need to open up far more time than you believe between the first draft and the due date. That's crucial. And I have to be able to have a friend. I gotta have a peer reviewer who together we know the same things we're looking for, because a peer reviewer is not an editor. They shouldn't show up and say, here's how I would write this. I would use this word here, not that word. They're trying to talk about the weaknesses of your writing so you can do the thing. So if I'm starting right away, I want to stop summarizing. I want to sit down with a plan. And I want to give myself time for the third, fourth, fifth draft. I want to know the difference between revision, which is structure and content, and editing, which is final mechanics and wordiness. Definitely write more than you need on your first draft because you should be cutting during revision. Those are the tips I would start with right away.
Fantastic. We have time for one more question. Let's see if we have any from the online audience. If not, I do have a question that I wanted to ask, but let's give a chance for somebody from the online audience, maybe if they would like to. Last chance. If not, I will ask the question. So Brian, you work with international studies, international global studies, and you have students who come from different academic perspectives. What you presented today as best practices of how to move on to be a better scholar, produce outcomes that could be better candidate for being published. Do you see any differences that might emerge from different disciplines? And more specifically, if you think that, for example, someone writing from a historical discipline, more narrative, would that, your recommendations, would they look differently in any way?
They wouldn't look differently at the core level, but I'm always going to suggest that they're reaching out to be reading historians talking about writing, because you are going to have stylistic differences amongst even the social sciences, not nevertheless all of your disciplines. But this list of things that you check with your friends, like a historian's paragraph, the first sentence is the most important sentence. Anthropologist paragraph. So you're trying to first find a core set of principles in your writing that are just good for everybody, that nobody would argue. And that's why the more books and authors you read, the more you see the same advice appearing in everybody's writing, the more you could say, okay, I'm going to save that one. That one's important for everybody. So now I have a core that I would work with no matter who I'm working with. Then above and beyond your core is like, okay, now what is your disciplinary conventions for how your style of execution differs of these core principles? And you should be able to be savvy about how those long-term traditions could affect your product. At the same time, not using the throwaway excuse, oh, that's just, it's just because I'm a historian that I write like that.
Yeah.
That's kind of an easy out to tell somebody trying to give you tips who's not in your discipline that I'm just going to ignore these basic concepts of don't write passively. because I write like a philosopher or these types of things. You got to balance that sort of thin line.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I'd like to thank everybody who participated in this discussion, those in the room and online with your lovely questions. And thank you again to Dr. Brian Lagotte for this insightful talk with practical examples of how we can improve our writing. And again, these kind of techniques apply to everybody, not just for graduate students. It's also for undergraduate students, for early career scholars, and even for established scholars who might be a little bit missing of how they should have their work look and sound and be much better than it is. So thank you so much for all of this contribution. We now come to the final segment of our conference, the presentation of a new initiative that we did not announce originally. It was just decided about a month ago, which is the 2025 Best Graduate Student and Early Career Scholars Paper Award in Druze Studies. This award was not announced earlier, but after several good papers that we have received submitted to us by the end of August, members of the Druze Studies Journal editorial board volunteered to review and evaluate eligible submissions. The award committee was chaired by Dr. Hussam Timani, joined by Dr. Traboulsi and Dr. Rabah Halabi. We extend our sincere thanks to the committee for their time, for their dedication, and for their thoughtful deliberation. I would like now to invite Dr. Hussam Timani, the chair of the award committee, to share the committee's decision and announce the recipient of the award.
All right. Thank you, Rami. You can hear me, right? Make sure.
I think we are not hearing you well.
Okay. Now, can you? How
Yes.
about now? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Rami, for inviting me to chair the committee, and also thank Dr. Rabah Halabi and Dr. Traboulsi for serving on this committee and contributing to the selection of the best paper. Before I announce the winner, I want to acknowledge the papers that have been submitted. We received 7 papers, and they are all good. It was a very hard decision. I wish we can give everyone an award, but we have to select one. So I want to mention the title and the authors. So the first paper titled Druze Political Dynamics, a Comparative Study of Political Engagement in Lebanon and Israel by Youssef Dinshal. The second paper, The Resurgence of Druze Particularism in Suwaida, a Geopolitical Analysis of Strategic Shift by paper, Bibliography of Periodical Literature on Druze in 2024, a scoping review by Charlie Johnson, Michael Pepper, and Rami Zeedan. The fourth paper, Minority Behavior During Popular Uprisings and Civil War, Syrian Druze Community by Anna Filippi. The fifth paper, From Fragmentation to Unity, Public Sculpture and Civil War Memory in Lebanon by Rima Barakat. Sixth paper, The Role of Customary Law in a Context of Legal Vacuum, Case Study of the Suwaida Governorate, Syria, 1925 to 2025, by Mael Bomar and Nauras Aziz. And the last paper, Druze Family Law in the Context of Lebanon's Legal Pluralism, by Maren Hoppner. The committee made its selection based on the following criteria: originality, methodology, significance and impact, and clarity of the paper. So now the committee is pleased to announce that the 2025 Druze Studies Award for the best paper will go to The Role of Customary Law in a Context of Legal Vacuum, a case study of the Suwaida Governorate by Mael Bomar and Nauras Aziz. So I want to mention why this paper. The paper sheds light on a highly significant issue: the dual nature of the Druze relationship with central authority throughout history, not merely the way the central authority has dealt with them, as most previous studies have emphasized. This perspective presents a new and refreshing angle. Equally impressive is the comprehensive and well-structured theoretical framework the authors employ. It is grounded in two key premises. First, the historical development of the Druze community in Syria, and second, the tendency among certain minorities to resolve disputes through customary practices that align with or complement the central government's laws, particularly in context marked by the weakness or even absence of central authority. The selected paper offers a new perspective on the Druze in Syria and advances an original argument that will significantly advance future Druze studies. The paper demonstrates a theoretical and methodological sophistication, and the argument is well-focused, logical, and will have significant impact on future research. Congratulations to Mal Bouammar and Nawras Aziz. Thank you.
Congratulations to Nawras Aziz and to Mal Bouammar. If you are with us today, if you'd like to say anything, we can open the floor for you.
Thank you very much. I am deeply grateful to the committee for recognizing our research. Honestly, I was not also in this position to expect this award. That I thought that research need more also review, and I expect more comments. But thank you very much for this award, for this recognition. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Zeedan. I highly appreciate all your efforts, your very kind introduction, and for the very good and high qualified organizations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mal, for these kind words. And again, thank you to our award committee, to Dr. Hussam Timani, Dr. Samer Traboulsi, and Dr. Rabah Halabi. We appreciate your hard work and dedication. Thank you so much.